Anakin Skywalker stood in the center of the Chancellor's private office, and the galaxy balanced on the edge of a blade. The room was dark. Smoke curled in thin lines near the shattered window. Outside, the lights of Coruscant blinked on and off like nothing had happened. Like the most important moment in galactic history wasn't unfolding right here, right now, in this room. Palpatine was on the floor, beaten, weakened. His face cracked and pale, his yellow eyes wide and wild. He was screaming for help, screaming at Anakin, specifically because Anakin was the only person in that room who still hadn't made his choice. Mace Windu stood over Palpatine, lightsaber raised, ready to end it. And Palpatine was looking at Anakin like a man holding a card he was absolutely sure would win the hand. For weeks, the Chancellor had been working on him, whispering, building fear, feeding Anakin terrible visions. Padme dying in childbirth, cold and alone, while Anakin stood helpless. He had told Anakin there was a power that could stop death itself, and that only the dark side could teach it. Anakin had believed him, almost. But standing here now, looking at that face, something shifted. He thought of Padme's actual voice, not the vision, the real thing, the way she told him he was good when he couldn't see it himself. He thought of Obi-Wan. He thought of the clones who had fought beside him for 3 years. He thought of every life lost in this war, a war he now understood this man had quietly built, managed, and profited from on both sides. Palpatine smiled at him. That smile made the decision. Anakin ignited his lightsaber not to strike Mace Windu down, not to save the man who had manipulated him, to finish what needed to be finished. The blade moved fast. Palpatine had no time to react, no time to call lightning, no time to reach for the darkness that had served him for decades. He fell. Anakin stood over the body, breathing hard, hands shaking at his sides. The most powerful Sith Lord in 1,000 years was gone. But somewhere deep in the back of his mind, Anakin remembered Order 66 was already loaded, already armed, already waiting for a signal. A signal that only one man could send. A man who was now lying dead on the floor of his own office. Across the galaxy, clone commanders stood at their posts and waited. On the forest moon of Kashyyyk, Commander Gree stood just a few steps behind Master Yoda, close enough. On Utapau, Commander Cody had already passed along Anakin's lightsaber coordinates to his troops, unaware that the plan had just collapsed. On a dozen other worlds, clone soldiers held their positions, fighting droids, following orders, trusting their generals the way they always had. They were waiting for the override command. It never came. Without Palpatine alive to transmit the signal, the behavioral chips buried deep in every clone trooper's mind stayed quiet. No compulsion, no cold instruction, no Order 66. The clones continued their missions exactly as trained, loyal to the Republic, loyal to their Jedi commanders, loyal to a purpose that hadn't been stolen from them yet. Master Yoda paused on Kashyyyk. He went still, eyes closed, head slightly tilted the way he looked when he was reaching into the Force for something he couldn't quite name. And then his expression changed. Not relief, exactly. Something deeper and quieter than that. Like a man who had been bracing for a blow and felt it stop midair. He didn't know what had changed yet, but he knew something had. Back on Coruscant, Mace Windu moved quickly. He locked down the Chancellor's office. He sent an emergency priority signal to every council member within reach. No details, just 3 words. Come to me. Meanwhile, the Senate communication channels were already lighting up. The Chancellor had gone silent. His guards were not responding. His office was sealed. Senators, aides, and security officers flooded the emergency channels with questions that nobody could answer. And across the Outer Rim, the separatist droid armies, already leaderless after Count Dooku's death, began powering down one by one. Their central command structure was severed. Their strategic coordination collapsed. The Clone War, which had consumed the galaxy for 3 years and cost millions of lives, quietly ended. Not with a victory speech, not with a parade, with a locked door, a dead man, and one young Jedi Knight, standing in the silence of an office that smelled like ozone and burnt carpet, wondering what he was supposed to do next. The galaxy didn't know it yet, but it had just been saved. The problem was, saving something and healing it are two very different things. And the Senate was already starting to panic. Mace Windu had been a Jedi Master for decades. He had survived battles, assassinations, and confrontations with the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. He was not an easy man to shake. He had seen things that would have broken most people, and he had walked away from all of them with his composure intact. But when Anakin Skywalker looked him in the eye and said the words out loud, Mace Windu went completely still. The council assembled within the hour. Every master who could be reached came either in person or by hologram, their blue-white images flickering around the circular table in the Jedi Temple. And Anakin stood in the center of that room and told them everything. Palpatine was Darth Sidious. The Sith Lord they had been searching for was the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, the man who had personally overseen the Jedi Order's role in the Clone War, the man who had signed every deployment order, approved every military operation, and maintained personal relationships with multiple Jedi Masters, including Anakin himself, for over a decade. He had run both sides of the war. Every battle, every death, every sacrifice that good soldiers and good Jedi had made believing they were fighting for the Republic, all of it had been feeding a plan they never knew existed. The room went quiet when Anakin finished. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that happens when a truth lands and nobody knows what to do with it yet. Ki-Adi-Mundi spoke first. His voice was careful and measured, and barely holding together. He was here, the entire time, sitting in the Senate, controlling the war from both sides. No one disagreed. Yoda sat with his eyes closed for a long moment. When he opened them, the weight in them was visible, and for the first time in anyone's memory, the oldest and most respected Jedi in the Order looked something very close to ashamed. Blind. We were, he said quietly. Failed in our greatest duty. We have. Those words fell heavy in the room, because they were true, and every master sitting at that table knew it. The Jedi had been looking outward for years at battle lines and separatist movements and the distant threat of the Outer Rim. While they were looking that direction, the darkness had been sitting 3 floors above them, in a well-furnished office, smiling. Mace looked at Anakin, not with the suspicion Anakin had grown used to, not with the cold evaluation of a master assessing a knight who had always made them uncomfortable. Something different. Something that might have been the beginning of respect, mixed with the guilt that no amount of Jedi composure could fully hide. You saw what we didn't, Mace said. You stopped what we couldn't. He paused. But now, we need to hear everything. And Anakin knew exactly what that meant. Anakin didn't wait for them to ask. He told them, all of it, from the beginning. His secret marriage to Senator Padme Amidala, hidden for 3 years, maintained through stolen time and careful deception, in direct violation of the Jedi Code. The visions that had started months ago, Padme dying, over and over, in childbirth, while Anakin stood outside the door unable to stop it, how those visions had consumed him, how they had made him desperate and reckless in ways he hadn't fully admitted even to himself. And then the worst part, the part that made the room go tense in a way it hadn't been before. He told them about Palpatine, the private meetings, the slow, careful manipulation, the way the Chancellor had positioned himself as the only person in Anakin's life who truly understood him, who didn't judge him for his emotions, who didn't hold the code over his head like a measuring stick, how Palpatine had offered him knowledge, power, a way to cheat death and save the woman he loved, and how Anakin, scared and alone and running out of options, had listened. He told them how close he had come to striking Mace down in that office. The silence in the room after that admission was different from all the others. This one had weight to it, edges. Mace Windu's expression was controlled, but his jaw was tight.
You broke your oath to this order. You kept secrets that put every Jedi at risk.
You met with a Sith Lord and withheld that from your superiors, and you nearly... I know what I nearly did, Anakin said. His voice was steady, quiet, not defensive, just honest, and I chose not to do it. That stopped Mace cold. Yoda spoke before the silence could harden into something that couldn't be walked back. Acknowledge your failures. You do. Your path from the edge, you found. He paused. Rare, that is. Not easy. Not small. But the council was divided. Some masters argued that Anakin was proof of everything dangerous about the Chosen One prophecy, that raw power without structure was a disaster waiting to happen, and that only luck and timing had prevented something catastrophic. Others saw it the opposite way. They saw a man who, with years of manipulation pressing down on him from every direction, had still found the line and stepped back from it. The debate ran for hours. The final decision was not clean. No formal punishment not given what Anakin had done for the Order. But there would be a formal inquiry. His rank would be reviewed. His council access would be restricted until that inquiry was complete. And his marriage, once a secret, was now on the record. Anakin heard all of it and nodded. Because somewhere across the city, in a medical facility near the Senate district, Padme had gone into labor. And for the first time in months, he wasn't afraid of what he would find. The medical droid's voice was calm and completely matter-of-fact. 2 healthy births. 1 boy, 1 girl. Anakin arrived, still dressed in his Jedi robes. He still carried the weight of everything that had happened in the last several hours. The death, the council, the confession, the long walk through a Senate district buzzing with confusion and fear. He had passed 3 news crews on the way in, all of them shouting questions at anyone who looked official. He kept walking. He pushed open the door to the medical room and stopped. Padme was pale. She was exhausted, in the deep bone-level way that only comes after something enormous. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and her eyes were half closed. She opened them when she heard him come in. She looked at him, really looked the way she always did, like she was checking to make sure the person in front of her was actually him and not a version of him she was going to have to talk back from somewhere dark. And then she saw his face, and she knew. "You came back," she said. "I always come back," he told her. The droid placed the boy in his arms first. Anakin had held weapons since he was a child. He had fought in battles, piloted starships, and survived things that would have ended most people. None of it had prepared him for how light that small weight was, how completely it rearranged everything inside him. Luke, then Leia. He sat on the edge of the bed and held them both and didn't say anything for a long time. Padme rested her head against his shoulder. Outside, the city kept moving, the news kept running, and the Republic kept spinning through whatever came next. In here, there was just this. Quiet. Real. His. It lasted almost a full day. Then Obi-Wan appeared in the doorway. His expression was the kind Anakin had learned to read over 15 years, completely composed on the surface, which meant the news underneath it was serious enough to require composure. He looked at Anakin over the tops of the sleeping twins' heads. "The council needs you. Something is moving in the Senate." A pause. Something we didn't plan for. Anakin looked down at Luke, at Leia, at Padme, who had already opened her eyes, and was watching him with the steady, clear-eyed look of a woman who understood exactly what that knock on the door meant. "Go," she said softly. "We'll be here." He handed the twins back carefully. He stood up. He picked up his lightsaber from the table where he had set it down, and he followed Obi-Wan back into the galaxy that still needed him. The Republic did not celebrate. It fractured. Within 48 hours of Palpatine's death, the Senate was in full emergency session, and calling it a session was being generous. It looked more like a room full of frightened people shouting past each other, each one trying to establish their position before someone else established it for them. Who was now in charge? Who had authorized the Jedi to move on the Chancellor? What exactly had happened in that office? And why were the full details being withheld from the Senate floor? How could the most powerful man in the Republic have been a Sith Lord? And nobody had known. That last question was the one that hurt the most. Masa Meta Palpatine's personal aide and one of the very few individuals who had known his master's true identity disappeared from public view within 24 hours of the news breaking. He didn't flee the planet. He went quiet. And behind closed doors, he began making contact. Other loyalists, former allies, people who had built their careers and their fortunes inside the structure Palpatine had created and who had no interest in watching that structure come apart. They called themselves reformers in the Senate chambers. They called themselves something different in private. In the Outer Rim, the response was faster and less political. The crime syndicates that had operated under Palpatine's indirect protection, the ones that moved weapons, information, and people across the galaxy with the quiet understanding that certain officials would look the other way, immediately began repositioning. A new power center would form eventually. It always did. The question was, who would be at the top of it? And then there were the others, the ones who had served Palpatine not through politics or money, but through the Force itself. Not full Sith, the rule of two had always kept those numbers small, but there were others, dark side practitioners, Force-sensitive assassins, acolytes who had operated in the shadows for years, doing work the Republic was never meant to see. When they felt Palpatine's presence vanish from the Force, some of them went silent. Some of them started planning. The Jedi Council moved to address the Senate's concerns quickly, too quickly, argued some critics in the mid-rim. Senators from smaller systems raised uncomfortable questions about Jedi authority, about oversight, about who exactly the Order answered to, and what prevented them from making these kinds of unilateral decisions again in the future. The Republic had just been saved from a Sith dictatorship, but in its place stood a fractured democracy, a Senate in crisis, and a galactic underworld that was already learning how to use the chaos. And somewhere in the Outer Rim, in a place the Jedi had never been asked to watch, a signal began to broadcast on a frequency only certain people knew how to hear. The Senate hearing lasted 3 days. Senator after senator stood at the podium and asked the same question in 100 different ways. What gives the Jedi the right? The right to enter the Chancellor's private office uninvited. The right to engage in armed conflict with the head of the Republic's government. The right to use lethal force against an elected official, even one who, as was now publicly known, had been secretly manipulating the galaxy for decades. Many of the senators asking loudest were not Palpatine loyalists. They were genuinely scared. Because the revelation of Palpatine's identity had not made the Jedi look powerful and heroic to everyone. To a significant portion of the Senate, it had raised a more troubling question. If the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic could be a Sith Lord for over a decade without the Jedi noticing, what else were they missing? What kind of oversight existed for an order that answered to no one, moved freely through the galaxy, and made military decisions with consequences affecting trillions of lives? Inside the Jedi Temple, the arguments were harder to contain. Master Windu made his position clear early. The Order needed a stronger role in the new government structure, not less involvement, but more. Formal representation on the Security Council. Direct access to Republic intelligence operations. A permanent Jedi presence embedded in the institutions most vulnerable to dark side infiltration. Never again, he argued, should the galaxy's protectors be kept at arm's length from the information they needed to do their job? Yoda pushed back with equal force and far fewer words. In one closed session, he looked at Mace across the table and said simply, "Rulers, we must not become. A weapon the Jedi Order is not. Down that road, I have seen where it leads." Both positions had logic behind them. Neither was entirely right. Anakin stayed mostly quiet during the formal debates. He answered the council's questions. He attended the required hearings. He gave testimony to the Senate inquiry in precise, factual language that reporters quoted for weeks afterward. But in private, he felt the fracture lines forming under his feet. Some masters wanted him front and center, proof that the Jedi Code could produce someone of extraordinary moral courage even in the worst conditions. Others wanted him kept out of the public conversation entirely. A married Jedi who had concealed secrets from the Council for years and had nearly defected to the Sith was not the face the Order needed while fighting for its own credibility. Anakin understood both arguments. He also understood that neither of them was really about him. They were about what the Jedi Order was going to become now that the war was over and the excuse of crisis was gone. And then one night, while Padme slept and the twins were quiet, Anakin's comm unit activated. Scrambled signal. Unknown origin. No identification. But the symbol embedded in the header of the message was something he recognized immediately. A Sith mark. Whoever sent it was not Palpatine. Which meant someone else was already stepping into the space he had left behind. 6 months after Palpatine's death, statues of Anakin Skywalker began appearing in public squares on Coruscant. He hated them, not because of false modesty, but because every time he looked at one, at the confident, composed figure holding a lightsaber like a symbol of everything noble and right, he remembered the truth the sculptor hadn't been there to see. He remembered the yellow eyes, the fear, the moment the darkness had its hand around his heart and squeezed, and how very close he had come to letting it. The man in the statue had never experienced that moment. The real Anakin Skywalker thought about it almost every day. Yoda visited him once, privately, in the small apartment where the twins slept in the evenings, and Padme worked late on Senate reform legislation she had convinced herself might actually pass this time. The old master came alone. They sat together without speaking for a while, a silence that felt, for once, like rest rather than tension. Then Yoda spoke. "Saved the Order, you did," he said. "Saved the Republic. Grateful we are." A pause. "And yet, in the Force, still, I am uneasy." Anakin looked at him. "You think it isn't over?" "Destroyed the Sith you have," Yoda said carefully. "The rule of two broken. No known Sith Lord remains." He was quiet for a moment. "And yet, balance is not simply the absence of darkness. Something deeper it requires. Something we do not yet fully understand." Anakin had been thinking the same thing for weeks. He just hadn't said it out loud. The prophecy had always been read one way: the Chosen One would bring balance to the Force by destroying the Sith. And he had done that. The deed was done. By any straightforward reading, the prophecy was fulfilled. But the Force doesn't work in straight lines. The new visions came gradually. Not sharp and violent like the ones of Padme. These were quieter, vast, like looking at a galaxy-wide map and watching shadows gather in corners you couldn't quite name. New shapes moving through the dark side of the Force. Not Sith, not exactly, but something that had watched the Sith fall and was learning from what it saw. The encrypted transmission with the Sith mark was eventually traced to a planet in the Outer Rim, a world with no Jedi presence, no Republic garrison. A world that had slipped through every intelligence report filed in the last 3 years of war. Anakin looked at the coordinates for a long time. He walked into the room where Luke and Leia were sleeping side by side, the way they always seemed to drift back to each other, no matter where they started the night. He stood there for a while. Then he went and found Padme, He didn't say much. He didn't have to. She looked at him and understood. She always had. "Come back," she said. "I always come back," he told her. He picked up his lightsaber. He walked out into a night that was quiet and cool and full of city lights, stretching to every horizon. The Chosen One had fulfilled half the prophecy. He had destroyed the Sith, but balance, real balance, was not a single act. It was a living thing that required tending. And somewhere out in the dark between the stars, something was already learning how to grow in the space the Sith had left behind. Anakin Skywalker walked toward his ship. The Force whispered around him as he went. It did not sound finished,